The year was 1846, and the tensions between two nations, the United States and Mexico, had reached a boiling point that would soon erupt into one of the most transformative conflicts in North American history. The Mexican-American War was not born out of a single incident, but rather a complex web of political ambition, territorial desires, and cultural clashes that had been simmering for decades. The United States, driven by the idea of manifest destiny, the belief that it was America's divine mission to expand across the continent, looked southward toward lands rich in resources, promising vast opportunities for settlers, farmers, and traders alike. Mexico, a nation still fragile from its recent independence from Spain, struggled to maintain control over its northern territories, including the vast regions of Texas, New Mexico, and California. The stage for conflict was set when the Republic of Texas, which had declared independence from Mexico in 1836, sought to join the United States, a move Mexico considered illegal and provocative. Political leaders in Washington, influenced by expansionist sentiment and eager to assert American dominance, debated and maneuvered carefully, knowing that annexing Texas would almost certainly provoke Mexico but also fearing the domestic consequences of inaction. The border dispute along the Rio Grande, where both nations claimed sovereignty, became the flashpoint. Skirmishes along this disputed boundary quickly escalated into full-scale clashes, and soon, news of American troops engaging Mexican forces reached the public, igniting a surge of nationalism and patriotic fervor in both nations. Americans were encouraged to see their army march confidently into territories long considered foreign, imagining the promise of fertile lands, economic growth, and the spread of American ideals. Meanwhile, in Mexico City, the government faced mounting criticism for what many perceived as weakness and inability to defend the nation's territorial integrity. As the first shots were fired, the war was no longer just a political debate. It had become a harsh reality, one that would test the leadership, courage, and resilience of soldiers and civilians alike. The initial battles revealed the stark contrast between the two nations' military readiness. The United States, with a more organized and better-equipped army, leveraged strategic planning and superior logistics, while Mexican forces, though brave and fiercely patriotic, struggled with internal divisions, supply shortages, and inconsistent command. Reports of the first engagements painted a dramatic picture of chaos and valor, with soldiers facing not only the enemy but also the harsh and unfamiliar terrain, from arid deserts to rocky hills. The war's outbreak captivated the public, and newspapers on both sides sensationalized victories and tragedies, further inflaming emotions and creating a sense of inevitability that this conflict would reshape the continent. Yet beneath the surface, the stakes were much higher than territorial gain. The war would force both nations to confront questions of national identity, political authority, and the human cost of ambition. Every decision by generals and politicians, from troop movements to diplomatic negotiations, carried consequences that would ripple far beyond the battlefield. The conflict promised glory to some, devastation to others, and set the stage for a series of dramatic confrontations that would determine not just borders, but the very future of nations. As soldiers prepared for their first major campaigns, families and communities watched with anxiety, knowing that the coming months would bring uncertainty, suffering, and stories of heroism that would be remembered for generations. The Mexican-American War was no ordinary conflict. It was a collision of visions, ambitions, and destinies, where each battle would not only claim lives but also redefine the map of North America forever. In the midst of this turmoil, both nations faced moral and political dilemmas. Leaders in Washington wrestled with the implications of expansionism and the potential spread of slavery into new territories, while Mexico struggled to maintain national cohesion and assert sovereignty over lands that many Americans viewed as their manifest right. As tensions escalated, the first chapter of the war opened not with grand declarations, but with the quiet, deadly precision of soldiers preparing to fight, families bracing for loss, and governments calculating the cost of every move, setting in motion a conflict that would leave lasting scars on the continent and forever change the balance of power in North America. As the war unfolded, the Mexican-American battlefield became a canvas of strategic maneuvers, intense confrontations, and relentless hardships, revealing the true cost of ambition and miscalculation. The United States, under the leadership of President James K. Polk and military commanders such as General Zachary Taylor and General Winfield Scott, embarked on a campaign designed to assert dominance quickly and decisively. Taylor's forces, advancing from Texas into northern Mexico, faced the harsh realities of warfare in unfamiliar terrain, navigating rivers, deserts, and rugged hills while contending with supply shortages and extreme weather conditions. Mexican forces, though determined to defend their homeland, suffered from internal political turmoil, poorly coordinated strategies, and inadequate equipment, making their position increasingly vulnerable. Battles erupted in key locations like Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma, where artillery barrages and infantry charges clashed in chaotic and brutal encounters. Eyewitness accounts from soldiers describe scenes of deafening cannon fire, smoke-filled skies, and the cries of the wounded, painting a vivid picture of the intensity and horror that unfolded on the ground. The Mexican army, despite numerical advantages in some regions, struggled with morale, as officers frequently disagreed over tactics and communication between distant units proved difficult. In contrast, American forces, disciplined and methodically organized, exploited these weaknesses with aggressive yet calculated assaults, securing early victories that boosted their confidence and solidified public support back home. Each battle became a grueling test of endurance and resilience, with soldiers enduring exhaustion, hunger, disease, and the constant threat of enemy fire, revealing the human toll behind the political calculations that had sparked the war. The fighting was not limited to open-field engagements. Guerrilla-style skirmishes, ambushes, and urban confrontations challenged both sides to adapt rapidly. In towns and villages, civilians were caught in the crossfire, with homes destroyed, livelihoods upended, and families forced to flee or endure the chaos, illustrating the broader societal impact of the war. Amid these confrontations, the American strategy focused on a combination of rapid advances, securing supply lines, and targeting key Mexican strongholds to force concessions, while Mexican commanders attempted desperate counterattacks to reclaim lost territory and protect their nation's sovereignty. The war's narrative was marked by unpredictability. Sometimes, a minor skirmish could alter the course of a campaign, while in other instances, months of preparation and movement culminated in decisive battles that changed the trajectory of the conflict. Beyond the battlefield, diplomatic efforts and political maneuvering continued, as both nations weighed the costs of further escalation against the potential benefits of negotiation. Despite Mexico's fierce resistance, the disparity in military technology, training, and resources became increasingly apparent, contributing to successive American victories that further demoralized Mexican troops. Reports from the front lines often highlighted acts of extraordinary courage, strategic ingenuity, and tragic loss, with soldiers on both sides facing the stark reality that survival required not only skill but also endurance and luck. The war exposed vulnerabilities in leadership and logistics, as commanders navigated limited intelligence, unpredictable weather, and the ever-present threat of disease, which claimed nearly as many lives as combat itself. Meanwhile, back in the United States, public opinion and media coverage amplified the drama of each confrontation, portraying American troops as heroic liberators and emphasizing the strategic genius of their commanders, while Mexican forces were often depicted as valiant yet ultimately overpowered defenders of their homeland. The human dimension of the war, soldiers writing letters home, officers making agonizing decisions about advancing or retreating, and communities struggling to cope with the loss of life, added layers of tension and emotion that went far beyond maps and military reports. As the war pressed on, patterns of maneuvering and engagement emerged. The Americans prioritized key ports, rivers, and towns to control movement and disrupt Mexican logistics, while Mexican forces relied on defensive positions, ambush tactics, and local knowledge to resist the invaders. Each campaign revealed the complexity of the conflict, where strategy, terrain, and timing could determine success or failure, and where every engagement carried the weight of both political consequence and human suffering. Soldiers endured grueling marches under the scorching sun, shortages of food and ammunition, and the psychological strain of constant danger, while commanders struggled to balance aggressive offensives with the preservation of their forces. The Mexican-American War during these mid-war campaigns was not merely a sequence of battles. It was a relentless contest of endurance, ingenuity, and determination, exposing the vulnerabilities of nations, the courage of individuals, and the far-reaching consequences of territorial ambition. It was a war that unfolded not only in open fields and fortified towns but also in the hearts and minds of those who experienced it firsthand, leaving a legacy of sacrifice, tactical brilliance, and haunting memories that would shape both nations for decades to come. As the war progressed into its most pivotal stages, the Mexican-American conflict revealed the stark consequences of ambition, miscalculation, and the relentless momentum of a determined military power. Following the initial campaigns in northern Mexico, American forces under General Zachary Taylor and General Winfield Scott began to push deeper into Mexican territory, seizing control of key towns, forts, and supply lines, each victory signaling the growing dominance of the United States on the battlefield. However, these advances were far from easy, and every step forward came at a significant cost. Mexican troops, though increasingly demoralized, continued to mount fierce resistance, utilizing knowledge of the terrain and improvising defenses to delay and disrupt the American advance. The Battle of Monterrey, for instance, demonstrated the intense urban warfare that characterized much of the conflict, with street-to-street fighting, fortified positions, and civilian areas caught in the crossfire. Soldiers endured relentless artillery barrages, musket volleys, and the chaos of close-quarter combat, often witnessing the devastating human cost of each strategic maneuver. In the southern campaigns, Scott's amphibious landing at Veracruz marked a dramatic turning point, showcasing the scale and sophistication of American military planning. The siege of Veracruz was meticulously executed, combining naval bombardment, coordinated troop movements, and careful planning to minimize casualties while forcing a heavily defended city to surrender. Yet even in victory, the realities of war were stark. Disease claimed hundreds, supply lines were constantly threatened, and the strain on soldiers tested both their physical endurance and mental resilience. Behind the military operations, political pressures mounted on both sides. President Polk faced scrutiny over the legitimacy of the war, the ethical implications of territorial expansion, and the potential for prolonged conflict, while Mexican leaders grappled with internal dissent, shifting alliances, and the desperate need to maintain national unity. Every engagement, from open-field battles to fortified sieges, carried layers of strategic significance and human suffering, with soldiers and civilians alike caught in a struggle whose outcome was uncertain yet increasingly skewed toward American objectives. The war also exposed the vulnerabilities and complexities of logistics, communication, and command in 19th-century warfare. Troops marched across harsh deserts, navigated treacherous rivers, and endured blistering heat, all while relying on supply chains that were constantly under threat. Messages and orders could take days to reach units, leaving commanders to make high-stakes decisions with incomplete information. Yet the Americans leveraged their advantages in organization, artillery, and coordinated strategies, gradually undermining Mexican defenses and forcing concessions. Among the many tragedies of this period were the staggering human losses. Casualty reports reveal that thousands of soldiers on both sides perished from combat, disease, and exhaustion, while countless civilians were displaced, their towns and livelihoods destroyed by the relentless advance of armies. The human cost of war became painfully visible in every encounter, from the devastated streets of Monterrey to the battered outskirts of Veracruz. Amid this turmoil, moments of extraordinary heroism emerged. Soldiers risked their lives to hold positions, rescue wounded comrades, or execute daring flanking maneuvers, creating stories of courage that would endure long after the guns fell silent. Yet even heroism could not offset the broader tragedy, as strategic gains came with immense sacrifice, and victories were measured not just in territory but in lives lost. The Mexican-American War during these critical turning points highlighted a larger reality, that ambition and ideology, when coupled with superior organization and resources, could achieve rapid and decisive outcomes, but always at a profound human and societal cost. Families on both sides endured the absence of loved ones, communities faced disruption and devastation, and the political landscape of North America was being irreversibly altered. As the American forces pressed closer to Mexico City, the stakes could not have been higher. Each battle was a test of resilience, a negotiation of terrain and tactics, and a confrontation with the unpredictable horrors of war. Civilians witnessed the invasion firsthand, fleeing homes, hiding from marauding troops, and confronting the terror of artillery and musket fire. Meanwhile, Mexican commanders, aware of the inevitability of defeat in some theaters, sought to make every engagement meaningful, attempting to inflict maximum resistance and delay the Americans, hoping for diplomatic intervention or a shift in political circumstances. The combination of tactical brilliance, logistical planning, and unyielding ambition propelled the United States forward, while Mexico's courage and determination, though admirable, were increasingly strained by the cumulative toll of sustained conflict. As this phase of the war drew to a close, it became clear that the final chapters would involve the decisive capture of Mexico City and the negotiation of terms that would reshape the continent, setting the stage for a conclusion that would forever alter the map, the politics, and the memories of nations and individuals alike. Every soldier, civilian, and leader involved had felt the mounting pressure and gravity of what was at stake, making this period of the Mexican-American War a harrowing, suspenseful, and transformative chapter in history. As the Mexican-American War entered its final stages, the momentum of the United States forces became increasingly unstoppable, pushing deeper into the heart of Mexico and bringing the conflict to its most dramatic and decisive moments. General Winfield Scott's campaign toward Mexico City was a masterclass in military strategy, combining careful planning, logistical precision, and relentless determination. Landing his forces at Veracruz, Scott established a secure beachhead, allowing troops, artillery, and supplies to flow efficiently while minimizing exposure to Mexican counterattacks. The siege and eventual capture of Veracruz demonstrated not only the power of well-coordinated attacks but also the psychological impact on Mexican forces, who realized that their capital, the symbolic and political heart of the nation, was now directly threatened. From Veracruz, the Americans advanced through difficult terrain, encountering fortified towns, mountain passes, and resistance at key defensive positions. The Battle of Cerro Gordo exemplified the tension, ingenuity, and brutality that defined the final campaigns. Scott's forces outflanked the Mexican defenders, using terrain and coordinated maneuvers to break through, yet the engagement left both sides with devastating losses and a vivid reminder of the war's human toll. As soldiers marched onward, fatigue, disease, and limited resources compounded the challenges, while the Mexican army, though resolute, faced growing internal divisions, dwindling morale, and the strategic reality that their capital could no longer be defended effectively. Civilians bore the brunt of this final push, witnessing the destruction of towns, displacement of families, and the constant threat of violence as armies moved through the countryside. Each confrontation, from mountain passes to urban streets, carried immense stakes, with every decision influencing not only immediate survival but also the larger outcome of the war. The capture of Mexico City in 1847 was the culmination of these relentless campaigns, a dramatic event that symbolized the collapse of Mexican resistance in the face of superior planning, discipline, and resources. Street-to-street fighting, artillery bombardments, and the eventual surrender of key defensive positions marked a turning point that confirmed American dominance while exposing the full cost of victory. Mexican soldiers, leaders, and civilians faced the harsh reality of occupation, destruction, and political uncertainty, while American forces, though victorious, confronted the moral and logistical complexities of managing conquered territory. In the aftermath of Mexico City's fall, negotiations began that would define the political and territorial consequences of the war. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, signed in 1848, formalized the end of hostilities and resulted in a massive transfer of land, with the United States acquiring territories that would become California, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. This land acquisition not only reshaped the physical map of North America but also had profound implications for settlement, economic development, and the expansion of American political and cultural influence. The treaty represented both triumph and tragedy. Mexico lost nearly half of its territory, dealing a blow to national pride and economic potential, while the United States realized long-held ambitions, solidifying the vision of manifest destiny. Beyond the borders, the war left deep scars on soldiers, civilians, and communities, with thousands dead, wounded, or displaced and the trauma of violence and upheaval lingering for generations. The conflict exposed the brutal realities of 19th-century warfare, including the vulnerability of nations with internal political instability, the decisive advantage of organized military forces, and the human suffering that accompanies territorial and ideological ambition. The final campaigns of the Mexican-American War were characterized not only by strategic brilliance and battlefield victories but also by moments of intense human drama, acts of courage, desperation, and resilience that underscored the unpredictable and often tragic nature of war. Soldiers documented the exhaustion, fear, and determination they experienced, while civilians recounted the destruction of homes, loss of property, and the constant anxiety of living under occupation. The war demonstrated that the costs of conquest extend far beyond the battlefield, affecting every layer of society, and that victories achieved through strategy and power are inseparable from the human consequences that follow. By the time the treaty was signed, the United States had achieved its objective of territorial expansion, but the war's legacy remained a complex tapestry of ambition, loss, heroism, and national transformation. The final chapters of the conflict illustrated how political decisions, military planning, and human courage intersect to shape history, leaving an indelible mark on the nations involved and the individuals who endured its hardships. The conclusion of the Mexican-American War marked not only the end of a brutal and transformative conflict, but also the beginning of profound changes that would ripple across the continent and shape the future of both nations. With the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, the United States secured an enormous land acquisition, gaining control over the present-day states of California, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and portions of Colorado and Wyoming, a territory nearly half the size of Mexico itself. This territorial expansion fulfilled the ambitions of Manifest Destiny, providing immense opportunities for settlement, trade, and economic development. But it also ignited debates over the extension of slavery into new lands, further inflaming sectional tensions that would later culminate in the American Civil War. For Mexico, the consequences were devastating. The nation was left politically weakened, economically strained, and socially fractured, grappling with the loss of territory that had been under its control for centuries. Families mourned sons and fathers lost in combat, communities struggled to rebuild in the aftermath of destruction, and the collective memory of the war remained a bitter reminder of the consequences of political instability and foreign aggression. Soldiers on both sides returned home changed by the horrors they had witnessed. The deafening artillery, the chaos of close-quarters combat, the pervasive presence of disease, and the sight of comrades falling in battle. Diaries and letters from the period reveal not only acts of extraordinary bravery but also the psychological toll of prolonged warfare, with men confronting fear, uncertainty, and the moral complexities of taking life in the name of national objectives. The war's campaigns and battles became defining stories of heroism and tragedy, teaching lessons about leadership, strategy, endurance, and the unpredictable nature of military conflict. For historians, the Mexican-American War offers a case study in how political ambition, ideological conviction, and military capability intersect to produce outcomes that reshape nations and influence generations. The conflict demonstrated that superior planning, logistics, and coordination can overcome numerical advantage and local familiarity with the terrain, while also underscoring the limits of courage and resolve when faced with overwhelming opposition and internal divisions. Beyond the immediate military and political consequences, the war left a lasting cultural and social impact, influencing literature, art, and the collective consciousness of both nations. Monuments, memorials, and historical accounts preserve the memory of those who fought and perished, reminding contemporary audiences of the human stories behind territorial maps and political treaties. The Mexican-American War also served as a precursor to debates about national identity, sovereignty, and the ethical dimensions of expansion, issues that continue to resonate in discussions of history, politics, and international relations. As the United States celebrated the acquisition of new lands, it also faced the responsibility of integrating these territories, managing relations with indigenous populations and Mexican citizens, and navigating the growing tensions between free and slave states, a challenge that would shape the nation's trajectory for decades. Meanwhile, Mexico embarked on a difficult journey of recovery, striving to rebuild its economy, stabilize its political system, and preserve its national identity despite the profound losses suffered during the conflict. Reflecting on the Mexican-American War, it becomes clear that this was a conflict defined by ambition, courage, tragedy, and transformation. The battles, strategies, and negotiations illustrate not only the mechanics of war but also its human dimension, the sacrifices, the suffering, and the resilience of those who lived through it. For audiences today, understanding this war provides insight into the forces that shaped modern North America and the enduring lessons of history about leadership, decision-making, and the consequences of conflict. If you found the story of the Mexican-American War compelling and want to explore more about battles that shaped the world, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and press the bell notification button so you can watch our latest series on historic wars. By following our channel, you'll gain access to detailed, realistic, and engaging accounts of battles, strategies, and the untold stories behind the conflicts that changed nations, allowing you to experience history not just as a series of dates, but as vivid, human stories that continue to resonate today. Stay connected with us for more in-depth explorations of wars, heroes, and historical events that shape the modern world, and be part of our growing community of history enthusiasts who value both knowledge and storytelling.